Hello. So I'm back here in Philadelphia, and so I got back on Friday. Today's Monday, the 14th of March, and it's nice to be back. The wife with the animals. With that said, I still have a lot of crazy crap in my life, and I just sometimes you just want to get away from it. And I was thinking about this. It's nothing to do with myself per se, but it's mostly about what's going on in the world. I One of the words that I've heard a lot over the last I don't know 5-10 years that gets more publicity or more it just gets repeated more because I do notice that there is a bit of if one person says something in public, somehow, some way, gets repeated, and it's the same line over and over and over again, to the point where it's almost like you say a word in a room of parrots, and they all start, that's the word they memorize, and then they all go back to their respective homes, and they just, repeating the word, sort of unthinkingly. And it's almost as if they've been given a script. I'm not a very conspiratorially minded person, but you're using the same words over and over and over again. It makes me think that your opinions are not. You not only are your words not even your own, but your opinions definitely are not your own. So I just don't see a lot of thinking behind uh, what's being said, particularly on TV. Uh, when I was down in Virginia, my dad is a bit of a TV junkie. I guess that's what happens when you're old. That's the only thing that doesn't hurt. And if you fall asleep, that's fine. Something new will come up. But I noticed that the he's one for MSNBC, and it's definitely that they're all on the same page. You can tell that there is a company line that they all have to toe. And one of the words that kind of gets bandied around a bit, I think, is even the word bandy. See, it's slowly sinking into my head, and I need to. That's one thing I really try to avoid linguistic cliches, uh, because even if you uh, say these things and they're an accurate use, I think it's the slow creeping in is that first they try to get you by language, and then they start getting you by other means. So one of the words that does kind of creep in a lot, that gets used a lot, is the word hypocrisy. Now, obviously, I think most of us understand what hypocrisy is essentially you say one thing and then you do the opposite. So that you have sort of this schizoid mind where what your ideal is, or at least your projected ideal, is not what you end up doing. So there's maybe a fight between the higher minded part of you, the idealistic or even ethical side of you, versus um, what you do in practice. And that might not be, it shows that there's two parts of your mind, at least two parts of your mind at work. Um, and, part of this might be an image thing, that you want to be seen as an ethical person or high minded person. You don't really want to do that because it's either too painful or you don't actually believe the things that you say. Now, the thing is, that's not a good thing to do, to be a hypocrite, because I think a consistency within your own mind is probably not only the best thing for you, but it's also the best thing uh, for your projection to other people, because essentially you're a liar when you're a hypocrite. and liars usually have ulterior motives where they will, they want you to sort of put your guard down while they sneak around you and stab you in the back. So the thing is, the hypocrisy is not really it's not good. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It is bad when it's at higher levels. I'll give you an example. So you see a lot of people. A good example of this is during the whole coronavirus thing in the early days when governments were locking down people, like forbidding them to leave the house. Uh, it's one thing to be in favor of these and then go ahead and violate them, but it's another thing to be instituting them, to be a part of the politics of it. So the good example of this is British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was a proponent. I wouldn't say a full-throated proponent, but a reluctant proponent of lockdowns. And so he played these little games where you can, where it was fine when it was in the crappy rainy season, like March, early April. It got a little bit more difficult around May when the weather was really nice. So this was 2000. This is 2020. There was a bank holiday weekend. It was just amazing. And I really it was really hard for people to do that. So I can imagine you being like, like going outside, like apparently it doesn't really transmit that well. I'm not going to make this completely about coronavirus. This is more about the hypocrisy behind it. That you could see somebody saying like, okay, it's not going to really be that harmful if I just go out for a walk or I go out and hang out with people outside, even though it's not technically according to the rules. It's something that I think that we can get away with. Nobody's really going to blame me for doing this. So that's one thing, to do it at a personal level. And then it's another thing, like, so they ended up, the British government ended up locking everything down right around Christmas. I remember distinctly when my wife and I went to Windsor Castle, and we went to a pub, and the waitress said, "Oh, they're locking everything down on Friday. So get your last pub meal in as soon as you can." We're like, oh, and there was a whole debate on whether or not a Scotch egg is a substantial meal, because you couldn't you couldn't go to the pub and just drink. You had to have a substantial meal, which was up for debate whether a Scotch egg, which is essentially a hard-boiled egg. This is the most amazing thing ever. I'm surprised it's not very popular in America. It's a hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage and then breaded and then deep fried. It sounds disgusting, and when it's not done properly, it is kind of gross. But when it's done properly, it is amazing. If you like all of those parts, it's just, they really do well. Having a beer with it is even better. So anyway, and then, so this was around Christmas. They locked everything down, and it turned out, they only found this out maybe 2 or 3 months ago, that they were having like Christmas parties at 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives. And not just one, like nearly 10 of them over the course of that week of Christmas. And meanwhile, like early, like later that year when Prince Philip died, Prince Philip was the Queen's husband, died, and the Queen was sitting there on her own, following these coronavirus rules, like a good little soldier that she was not allowed to be around her family. And only, I think, 20 some people were only allowed to be a part of this. Now, you imagine somebody like Prince Philip, who has, their family's a decent size, But that a lot of people who have known Prince Philip was like nearly 100. He's known a lot of people over the course of his life. And some of it's very professional, but I imagine a lot of the staff who had served him over the years. Apparently, he was very popular with the staff because he was funny. He didn't really lord it over people. He didn't really make demands of them. He was just a fun guy to be around. They would have liked to have participated in it. Since it happened, the funeral happened right there at Windsor Castle. Now, that's blatant hypocrisy that the prime minister would go through these lockdowns, tell you that you can't visit your dying relatives, that you can't do it, you can't get on with your life, but they can go and have drink parties at number 10. That to me takes the hypocrisy that's relatively benign. It's not good, but it's certainly not evil, to a higher level because you're doing things at a higher level. It's almost like a multiplier effect. So at some point, you either show that you either have a lack of conviction in what your original beliefs were, that you're willing to violate them, so they're so flimsy that your will to do things like have a party is more important to you than your beliefs. So either you have a lack of conviction in those beliefs, or your desire to do these bad things is greater than your good intentions. Now that is not good. That is even worse than some person, some regular civilian doing this. Now, one of the things is that hypocrisy, while it's not good and it gets worse as you go up, you've seen like governors in the United States do this all the time. Mayor of Washington, D.C., the governor of California, especially. This happens to be people who have, obviously you have to be in favor of this stuff. So you have to be a lockdowner or locker down, whatever you want to call it. Have been hypocritical about this because if you weren't a person in favor of lockdowns, then it didn't really matter. You weren't asking people to do things that you yourself weren't willing to do. But what's worse than the hypocrisy and bad thoughts, the hypocrisy is the bad thought. It is the bad behavior. It's not the original thing. That we can sit here and debate until we're blue in the face and probably not get anywhere about whether or not lockdowns and all of these restrictions and masks and vaccine mandates and all that, whether those are a good thing. But if you're willing to violate those things, it's more of the I want to impose my will on you. That's the worst part. I don't really care what you do in your private life so long as it doesn't affect me. But once you take it to a public stage, you're willing to impose your will on me. That's the part I have a problem with. Is the hypocrisy is not really the bothersome aspect of this. It's the imposing your will on other people. I know that you have some kind of breakdown in your mentality, but it's like this. You've seen this a lot in public where you say where there's a good example of this in the 1980s was a very big time for televangelists in the United States, where there were a lot of evangelical preachers in usually southern states, but they would get syndicated nationally on television on early Sunday morning, where just before football or right before, they have political shows around like 10, 11, maybe 11, 12, and then they have football on at around 1 o'clock. So these shows would be on at like 9 o'clock in the morning. And guys like Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart would come on. And they're very charismatic, not in the good-looking popular sense, but more of very emotional, very, charge you up, kind of just whip you up into a frenzy kind of people. And they would focus on certain things like homosexuality or faithfulness to your wife. And then inevitably they would get caught either, not saying, one of them, but there was a rash of these people where they got caught either embezzling the money that they had taken because, there's a when you go to church, there's a collection plate that you put money in. Well, imagine that. They just whip a phone number up on the screen, and you can call in and give your donations that way. And obviously it made a lot more money. And so some of these preachers got caught embezzling the money. Some of them got caught in bed with prostitutes. Some of them got caught in bed with gay prostitutes. It was pretty wild. And inevitably they would get sort of paraded out in a public stage. And there's a famous it was a Tammy Baker. She got caught. I think the Bakers got caught embezzling, and she was known for having very, very thick makeup, particularly mascara. She got caught crying, and it just looked like it just streamed down her face, and it was just it was frightening. It was like some clown show from hell, and it was that. So the hypocrisy was on stage. I was like, you know what? The problem is that you do have these preachers who go out there. It's more of the fact that it's a double negative in these cases where the preaching, giving me lots of money for what? You know, like if you have the ministry where you go and build houses for people, like was a Habitat for Humanity, or people are doing collections for like dealing with these Ukrainian refugees. We're helping the Poles and the Slovaks deal with the influx of millions of refugees from Ukraine during the this whole war thing. But you got to kind of have to watch out, because this is a ripe opportunity for thieving and just embezzlement and just fraud, just outright fraud. So, you know, that it's more of the fraud and the embezzlement and the cheating on your wife that I have a problem with, instead of the hypocrisy. And, you know, like, I don't even care, like, that you've done this. That's your own thing. And if there is a God, you're going to have to answer some difficult questions when the time comes. And the problem with this is that ultimately it wouldn't be so bad if people didn't have such very public opinions, or they felt the pressure to give public opinions. So I think one of the solutions to this, the hypocrisy, is it's a two-part thing. It's voicing an opinion and then doing and putting into action something totally separate from that. And not only just totally separate from it, that's contradictory. So usually when you have an action, there's a will component of the sort of ideation of something, and then putting it into action. And those are two different components, but they have to be sort of linked together. That you usually don't cook dinner unless there's this will to cook dinner. It could be compelled, it could be under duress, but it could be totally of your own volition. But there has to be that will there in order to do the thing. It's not like it's a involuntary action like breathing or muscle spasms or anything like that. And so when you have this will part, it's nice to have it linked up to the action part, to have them on the same page. And that's, you know, it's hard work, because it's not always easy to do, to have these fanciful ideas and then actually go out and do it, because it's hard work. You might not have the payoff. And there's an easy payoff to have good opinions. And have them publicly, because not only do you get praise from one person if you have them in private, but you have praise from, you know, especially with social media, you have praise from thousands of people. That the praise is more addictive than the good action itself. Now, I think the problem is that people, I don't think, would have hypocritical problems if they weren't so in need of you know, publicly displaying their opinions and just giving opinions that they think will give them praise. Even you see this with actions where you people will sort of feel pressure, social pressure, or they'll have a desire for the praise of a good act. These are a little bit harder and a little bit fewer and far between because acts are a little bit more costly. They're a little bit more time consuming, take a lot more energy. And I don't think that that things are going in the right direction. If you want to minimize, you're going to see more and more hypocrisy. Now, I think obviously the solution is let's try to remove things from the public view. So I think that comes from within every single person, that if you want to have a healthy society, you have to have healthy individuals, and healthy individuals don't crave attention at every single second. And I think this comes from this craving that is basically, at some point we have made public every single facet of life, and going beyond that, we have politicized every facet of life. So everything is up for appraisal or approval or a program. Let's say, for example, there are 100 things in life. I don't know, 100 things that a person could possibly do, from cooking to cleaning to going to the mall, or taking your kids to school, all the things. I'm just rounding it to 100 so you can see a percentage. How many of those things should be subject to a political process? So when you do something, let's say you decide that you are going to go on vacation, right? When you decide, just you alone, you're going on vacation, I feel like a beach vacation's on. Okay, so I'm not going to Alaska, so you can kind of whittle it down till you get to, I don't know, Florida or something like that. When you think, oh, well, everybody goes to Florida. Well, all right, Georgia, I don't know. You kind of, okay, do I want people? You make these decisions based off of things that are criteria for you. But let's just say, for example, you take a family, and then you kind of like, okay, I have to ask the wife, well, where do you want to go? Well, I want to go skiing this year. I want to go to the beach. Okay. How about we go skiing this year, and next year we go to the beach? Okay, so you're doing a sort of quid pro quo there. That is a bit of a political process, but it's only involving the people who are directly concerned. The kids like everything. I mean, they might want something today, and then the next day they want something totally different. So you kind of have to temper your expectations and sort of give them a little less choice, because they'll go nuts. So as far as the political process is concerned, how many of those 100 things that I was talking about would you want to subject to a political process? That, in a political process, I would call like an election or a referendum, submitting this to a court case, or at every level. So everything that I just said, all these, I basically said 3 things. Then multiply it by the local level, the state level, the national level, and even international level. So you have 4 multipliers by this. So even if you have just 3 ways of doing this, you now have 12 different, iterations of those processes. And it reminded me of the story of, it's not a story so much as a point that Milton Friedman would talk about. It's like, say today I wanted to wear a green tie. Why should anybody have a say in what I wear other than me, especially if it's just a tie? So should I ask everybody in the house what color tie I should wear? Well, only insofar as that people are looking out for your best interest. Green might look goofy at a funeral or something like that, or it's not a power tie, so it should be red, and etc. But they're only looking out for your best interest, and they don't have final say on it. But let's say, for example, that you have a citywide election, that what color your tie is. Not only is that a waste of time and resources, but it's really putting power out of the person who is directly affected by the color of the tie to people who really don't benefit or you know, are negatively affected by the color of your tie. They get a voice in what you do. And just think about that. So you think, I don't really want other people um, debating and deciding what I wear. If the thing is, we want to use our public resources for something like, whether or not we should be going into the Ukraine with a military, that should be up for public debate. Whether or not, that these mask mandates and the vaccine mandates, that should be up for political debate. It should be on everybody's lips constantly, because it is basically you're telling other people what to do. So everybody should have a say in that. But for smaller things like, like smaller things that don't really affect everyone, I don't think there should be up for political debate. And since they shouldn't be up for political debate, they shouldn't even be sort of broadcast so much. I think that there's this unhealthy, like when, I don't know what it was like for school, like in school for you, but they would often try to get us to debate topics. Now I understand like, let's say, for example, classic one in American history is like the whole South versus the North, where that you can see why the South wanted to secede from the Union before the Civil War, and you could see why the North didn't want this to happen. And somewhere along the line, slavery gets involved with it, but it wasn't 100% that. It was, a lot of it was that. It was sort of behind the scenes, but it wasn't overtly that. It was wearing a mask. Let's say that the slavery issue was wearing a mask. Since it wasn't overt, and you could have other, let's just say you could have other topics use the same, well, this is the right of the state to decide this thing. You can do this with a lot of different things, whether it's abortion or, very, very touchy subjects that I won't get into. But I'm just saying that these states' rights things obviously are issues that get talked about using many different topics, or they work their way into many different topics. Now, that's sort of what I was talking about. That if this is something that only affects the state and it's not a federal issue, then why does another state get a say in our state's issue? You could say, well, there's something universal about these rights, the human rights. Okay. They're not in the Constitution. So why don't you put them in the Constitution, and then I don't have a choice in the matter? Well, anyway, zooming back to today, is I think that we ought to try to keep the number of things subject to a political process to a minimum. So, and likewise, if it's not something that's up for political debate, then it doesn't really get debated about. For example, like who has the best fan base of any baseball team? You're like, well, everybody seems to claim that. Nobody is really disinterested in this, so we kind of just agree to disagree. And I think that's where the political process should probably stop, is that when you ask a question, everybody gives an opinion, and nothing is solved. And that's fine. I don't want that to be an official policy that the New York Yankees are the best fan base. I don't want that, because I'm not a New York fan. And I'm sure New York fans don't want Philadelphia sports being voted the best. So we'll just leave it there. We don't need to discuss this any further. And that's it. And I think you should apply that principle to a lot of different subjects. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, you do need the government to step in. But I'm going to leave that for another day. I don't want to get too far into things. All right. I'll wrap it up there. This one a little long, but I thought it was worth it. I'll see you soon.